Have you ever wondered what a person truly feared most in the ancient world? Not death, not exile, not the judgment of kings, but something far more chilling: being accused of heresy by the secretive Zoroastrian cults who ruled the shadows behind Persia's sacred fires. Before armies marched and temples rose, these hidden circles of priests wielded a kind of spiritual authority that could unmake a life without ever drawing a blade. And the moment someone fell under suspicion, the world around them shifted into something dark, ritualistic, and terrifyingly calculated. What made these cults so feared was not just the punishment itself, but the way they believed they were cleansing the world by destroying a soul. To understand how a simple accusation could unravel everything a person knew, you first need to picture the world these priests inhabited. A world where fire was not just a symbol, but a living witness. Where whispers carried the weight of law. Where purity and corruption were not abstract ideas, but forces that, according to the cults, clung to human bodies like invisible parasites. And when a guardian of the sacred flame judged someone tainted, the response was swift, merciless, and wrapped in layers of ritual so ancient that even the devout trembled at their invocation. These cults operated quietly, away from the public ceremonies everyone recognized. Behind temple walls, beneath subterranean chambers warmed by ever-burning flames, they cultivated their own codes, their own oaths, their own forms of punishment. The accused rarely knew which rule they had broken. Sometimes a dream, a gesture, or a misunderstood prayer was enough to brand someone spiritually corrupt, and once marked, they entered a labyrinth of rites meant to strip away identity, dignity, and any sense of safety they once possessed. Yet what truly shocks historians is how these guardians believed themselves protectors of cosmic order. They insisted that the torment inflicted on the accused was not cruelty, but cleansing, not punishment, but transformation. And as we uncover these rituals piece by piece, we begin to see how fear became a weapon far more potent than any sword, how spiritual authority turned into psychological domination, and how those chosen to defend purity instead created some of the darkest chapters in early religious history. As you listen to this story unfold, consider something. If power in the ancient world was defined by who controlled the body, what does it mean when someone claims control over the soul? That question is the key to understanding everything that happens next, and the reason these forgotten rituals still echo in the margins of ancient manuscripts. Before we continue deeper into this hidden world, tell me something. Have you ever encountered a story that made you question everything you thought you knew about ancient faiths? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Make sure to like this video, and check if you are already subscribed to the channel. What you are about to discover may surprise you, and the path we follow next leads into even darker territory, where the boundaries between devotion and domination begin to blur. Long before the word heresy carried the weight it would gain in later empires, the Zoroastrian world already wrestled with fears of spiritual corruption. But what most people never learn is that beneath the public rituals described in official texts, parallel currents of belief were forming, guided by priests who navigated the margins of orthodoxy. These were not chaotic rebels or self-proclaimed prophets. They were insiders, guardians of ritual purity, who believed the sanctioned teachings had grown too lenient, too exposed, too easily manipulated by the ruling elite. In their view, the world was slipping away from the cosmic order, and only a more secretive, more disciplined, more punishing structure could preserve the balance between light and darkness. These underground circles emerged from disagreements so subtle that even learned scholars might have missed them. A disputed interpretation of ritual fire, a disagreement about the nature of spiritual contamination, a question of who had the authority to judge purity and who merely served it. And from those subtle fractures came factions, groups convinced that the official priesthood had diluted sacred truth. They formed their own councils, their own codes, and eventually their own justice systems. To the outside world, they blended seamlessly with the larger religious fabric. But behind closed doors, they crafted rituals that would never be spoken aloud in public ceremonies. What makes these cults particularly unsettling is how methodical they were. They created hierarchies that mirrored the official priesthood, but operated with an entirely different purpose. Novices trained not only in scripture, but in the interpretation of omens, symbolic gestures, and micro-expressions believed to reveal hidden, spiritual decay. Senior priests kept secret scrolls encrypted with coded instructions, meant to be understood only by those deemed spiritually disciplined enough to wield judgment without being corrupted by it. And above them stood shadow leaders, figures rarely mentioned even in whispered conversations, who were believed to commune directly with the forces guarding the boundaries between order and chaos. These groups cultivated fear not by accident, but by design. They believed that purity was constantly under attack, and vigilance had to be absolute. They monitored rituals that others performed casually, scrutinizing every movement, every breath, every flame that flickered too sharply or too weakly. And when they sensed deviation, they reacted swiftly. Members of the community, often ordinary worshippers attending routine ceremonies, sometimes found themselves pulled aside by a priest whose expression gave nothing away. What followed was a quiet conversation, a subtle question, a moment of hesitation from the accused. That was all it took. The suspicion itself became the spark for an internal investigation. Inside the secret chambers of these cults, doctrine and paranoia intertwined until they were indistinguishable. The priests convinced themselves that any impurity left unchecked would spread like a stain, threatening not just the accused, but the spiritual stability of the entire region. Their underground councils met in hollowed stone rooms lit by dim torches, their voices echoing with a gravity that made every accusation feel like cosmic warfare. They believed they were preserving the world, guarding the flame that held back the darkness. But in their pursuit of purity, they built mechanisms of fear and punishment so severe that even fellow guardians would later struggle to understand how such measures had ever taken root. As these cults grew more confident, their power extended far beyond temple walls. And the moment someone was accused, the rituals that followed no longer resembled anything found in public ceremonies. They belonged to a darker, more secret realm, shaped by the belief that salvation required suffering, and that the soul could be broken to be remade. And that is when the real terror began, hidden from the eyes of the faithful, but preserved in fragments of testimony that survived against all odds. Once someone fell under the shadow of suspicion, the next stage unfolded quietly, almost ritualistically, as if the cults believed that truth could be coaxed out of silence rather than forced through confrontation. Accusations rarely appeared in the open. They emerged as murmurs passed through narrow corridors, notes exchanged between senior priests, or private observations documented in coded script. The accused often had no idea they were being scrutinized until the ritual of inquiry began, and by then the machinery of judgment was already moving, slow, deliberate, impossible to escape. The process was designed to mimic divine insight, as though the priests claimed not merely to interpret signs, but to reveal hidden truth placed before them by cosmic forces. Investigators watched the accused with an almost clinical intensity, studying every gesture for signs of impurity. A faltering voice during a prayer, a misplaced offering, a hesitation when approaching the sacred flame. Any of these could be interpreted as evidence of spiritual deviation. What modern minds might dismiss as nerves or fatigue, these cults considered manifestations of darkness creeping into the soul. The first step was always observation. Priests attended communal rituals to monitor those under suspicion, blending into the crowd so seamlessly that the accused rarely realized they were being watched. Their expressions remained unreadable, trained over years to reveal nothing but a calm devotion. Yet behind those steady eyes, judgments were being formed with terrifying certainty. Every detail was recorded in secret ledgers, creating a profile of spiritual behavior that determined the next phase. When the moment arrived for direct confrontation, it never resembled an interrogation. It began with a soft summons, often delivered by a junior acolyte whose voice carried no warning. The accused would be guided into a quiet chamber lit by a single flame, the air heavy with incense meant to signal solemnity rather than threat. But beneath that calm exterior, the atmosphere pulsed with tension. The priests believed that truth reacted to fire, that purity revealed itself under heat, and impurity recoiled. Every gesture they made in these rooms was part of a carefully crafted ritual designed to unsettle the accused without ever raising a hand. Questions came slowly, each one deceptively simple. Did you feel the flame flicker during last night's ceremony? Did your mind wander during prayer? Did you notice a shadow crossing the sacred altar at dawn? Nothing about these questions indicated accusation, yet every answer was weighed as if the fate of the world hinged on it. The priests were not looking for logic. They were searching for tremors, in the voice, in the hands, in the hesitation between words. They believed corruption revealed itself through hesitation, as though the soul stumbled before the tongue did. If the accused showed any sign of confusion or fear, the priests interpreted it as internal conflict, which in their teachings meant contamination. And once their suspicion deepened, the investigation shifted into a realm far more invasive. They introduced symbolic tests, subtle but deeply psychological. The accused might be asked to hold a piece of sanctified metal believed to burn only the impure, or recite a prayer backward to reveal hidden intentions. These tests were not meant to prove innocence. They were designed to expose weakness. Every failure, every moment of uncertainty, every flicker of doubt was recorded and magnified. Soon, the accused found themselves trapped in a cycle of scrutiny where even their attempts to defend themselves became part of the evidence against them. The cults viewed self-preservation as a sign of guilt. True purity, they insisted, required calm acceptance, silence, and surrender. And as the priests closed in, forming a circle of judgment that tightened with every passing day, the accused felt the last strands of normalcy slip away. The process was no longer an inquiry, but a descent into a system engineered to break certainty, identity, and will, preparing them for rituals far darker than any public worshipper would ever glimpse. The first punishments were subtle, almost imperceptible to an outsider, yet devastating to those who knew the language of the cult. The accused were not immediately subjected to physical pain. Instead, the cults used psychological torment, isolation, and the manipulation of sacred symbols to convey condemnation. A single night in a darkened chamber beneath the temple, the walls lined with flickering fires could unravel a person faster than any whip or stake. Silence became a weapon. Every footstep, every flicker of shadow carried meaning, a constant reminder that the eyes of the unseen were upon them. Even the air itself seemed infused with judgment. Priests employed rituals of observation so precise that the accused felt as though every heartbeat was catalogued. They were compelled to recount every prayer, every gesture of devotion, and any deviation from the prescribed method was recorded as evidence of impurity. Fasting became more than discipline. It was a test of loyalty. Sleep deprivation, enforced for hours while chants echoed in hidden corridors, caused minds to fray, blurring the lines between reality and the intricate narratives the priests wove. They created a theater of fear where the accused became actors in a drama scripted by forces they could neither see nor fully understand. Even the familiar elements of worship transformed into instruments of punishment. A misaligned flame, a whisper misheard, a prayer said too quickly or too slowly could trigger a cycle of correction, followed by days of silent reflection enforced by the senior priests. The accused were made to witness ceremonies from which they were excluded, seeing their peers participate freely while they remained outside, invisible yet hyper-aware. The sense of alienation deepened the psychological impact, teaching a lesson more enduring than any physical punishment. That deviation from the cult's interpretation of purity meant invisibility, exclusion, and spiritual suffocation. As suspicion escalated, the punishments became more dramatic. The accused were subjected to rituals designed to induce fear of both the earthly and spiritual consequences. Sacred implements, normally symbols of protection, were presented in ways that signaled threat. A ceremonial dagger held not to harm, but to intimidate. Sacred waters sprinkled in precise patterns meant to unsettle, chanting that rose and fell like waves against the mind. These methods ensured the accused internalized their own guilt, imagining corruption where none may have existed, until their thoughts became prisons. Yet even in these early stages, some guardians of the sacred fire recoiled. Stories survived of priests who questioned the morality of punishing the innocent, whose hesitation revealed that even among the devout, the methods could shock those entrusted with divine authority. But the leadership of the cults justified everything with the language of cosmic order. Fear was necessary to protect the flame. Suffering was essential to preserve the balance between light and darkness. The accused became instruments in a ritual far larger than themselves, their torment framed as service to the unseen. If you can imagine the weight of this scrutiny, consider the courage it took to endure it. And now, I want to ask you something. What would you do if every move you made was being judged by eyes you could not see, and failing meant more than punishment? It meant erasure from both human memory and spiritual order? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts or your feelings about this hidden world. Your reflections matter. And while you think about that, make sure to keep watching, because the next stage reveals punishments that even the cult's most faithful guardians found shocking, pushing the boundaries of faith, fear, and survival. The punishments escalated, shifting from psychological torment to ritualized physical discipline, administered with precision and symbolism that made even seasoned observers uneasy. The accused were brought before chambers lined with sacred artifacts, each chosen to remind them of cosmic law and the power wielded by those who served it. These objects were not instruments of random violence. Every cut, every pressure, every sting was measured to invoke reflection, repentance, and submission. The act itself was framed as purification. The pain, a necessary step to remove corruption from both body and soul. One of the most harrowing methods involved binding the accused in intricate knots designed to immobilize, forcing them into postures that were uncomfortable, unnatural, even excruciating. They remained in these positions for hours, sometimes days, while chanting filled the air, repeating invocations meant to mirror the cycles of light and darkness in the cosmos. Every movement they attempted to make against the restraints was interpreted as resistance, every sigh of discomfort catalogued as evidence of lingering impurity. To the priests, this was not cruelty, but a sacred calculus. Only by confronting the physical manifestation of spiritual weakness could the accused achieve true clarity. Another practice involved the controlled deprivation of the elements: water, warmth, light. The accused were placed in chambers where the temperature shifted unpredictably. Water was withheld in small measured amounts, and flickering torches cast shadows that made the walls appear alive. In this environment, time became distorted. Hours could feel like days, and the mind, untethered from normal rhythm, began to invent horrors, projecting inner fears onto the external world. The cults understood this vulnerability, exploiting it as a tool to compel confession, induce compliance, and reshape thought patterns according to their strict doctrines. Symbolic markings also played a central role. The accused were sometimes lightly branded or tattooed with sacred sigils, not as a permanent scar, but as a psychological reminder of their transgression and the authority of the priests. Each mark served as a visible testament to both punishment and transformation, reinforcing the hierarchy that positioned the cult above all human law. It was an unspoken warning. Deviation was visible, irreversible, and inescapable. Survivors would carry these marks long after the ceremonies, their flesh narrating the story of obedience, suffering, and spiritual realignment. Even when the physical measures were harsh, the rituals were performed with a solemnity that conveyed the weight of cosmic oversight. Silence was maintained, words were chosen with precision, and gestures echoed ancient codes. The accused often reported feeling as if they were being observed by invisible forces, as though the flames themselves were sentient witnesses. In these moments, the line between faith and fear blurred completely, and the mind, conditioned by years of instruction, could accept the pain as both deserved and redemptive. Despite the severity, the cult maintained an outward appearance of ritual purity, never allowing the broader community to see the intensity of what transpired behind closed doors. The physical punishments were cloaked in symbolism, the suffering reframed as divine instruction. And yet, for those who experienced it, the lessons were unmistakable. The path to spiritual authority was paved with both obedience and endurance, and the cost of deviation, real or imagined, was made manifest in ways that no one outside the sacred chambers could fully comprehend. As the cult's methods intensified, their rituals shifted into a realm that blurred the lines between spiritual discipline and psychological terror. The accused were not merely punished. They were immersed in ceremonies designed to transform perception itself. Nights were spent in near-complete darkness, the only illumination coming from tiny flames that cast flickering shadows across stone walls, shapes that seemed alive and threatening. The priests instructed the accused to meditate, chant, or recite prayers while enduring physical strain, believing that only through suffering could the spirit be purified and realigned with cosmic order. Each ritual was meticulously orchestrated to challenge the mind, body, and soul simultaneously. Isolation became a critical component of these rituals. Those accused were separated from friends, family, and any social support, often placed in chambers that limited sensory input. Silence, the absence of familiar faces, and the monotony of controlled environments created a mental space where thoughts became magnified Anxieties intensified, and the accused began to internalize guilt and fear. The priests observed, noting subtle signs of resistance or compliance, their eyes trained to detect even the faintest hesitation or doubt. In their doctrine, the soul revealed itself under pressure, and only by maintaining control over the environment could the priesthood ensure that this revelation was complete. Deprivation was not limited to sensory experiences. Food and water were rationed according to precise schedules, sometimes deliberately mismatched with natural cycles of hunger or thirst, forcing the body into acute awareness of scarcity. Even the smallest indulgence was considered dangerous, as it could weaken the mind's susceptibility to the yi. Rituals lessons. These measures were not intended to harm the body permanently, yet they stretched endurance to the absolute limits, compelling the accused to confront both physical discomfort and spiritual introspection in tandem. In addition to deprivation, priests employed elaborate purification ceremonies that involved symbolic gestures, movement, and repetition. The accused might be instructed to trace patterns in sand or ash, perform ritualistic motions that echoed the cycles of celestial bodies, or carry symbolic objects representing sin and redemption. Each task demanded unwavering focus, and every error was noted, interpreted as resistance or lingering impurity. The rituals were a form of cognitive conditioning, teaching obedience and reinforcing the cult's narrative that deviation from prescribed conduct threatened not only individual souls, but the balance of the cosmos itself. Some of the most harrowing practices involved enforced witnessing of sacred acts, performed by the priests themselves. The accused were compelled to observe complex rites that combined the elements of fire, water, and recitation, often at extreme temperatures or in confined spaces. The intention was to impress upon them the consequences of disobedience and the absolute power wielded by those who interpreted divine law. Through observation, the accused internalized lessons of fear, compliance, and reverence, while the priests remained invisible arbiters of judgment, their authority absolute and unchallenged. These darkly calculated rituals demonstrated the cult's mastery over both mind and body, their ability to manipulate perception and enforce control without public knowledge. The accused emerged from such trials fundamentally changed, conditioned to accept both fear and devotion as inseparable, and deeply aware that any misstep could invoke even harsher practices. And while the broader world knew only of ceremonial observances, the true intensity of these secret rites remained hidden, recorded only in fragmented accounts whispered across centuries, waiting to be rediscovered and understood. Even among the priests themselves, there were moments that tested the limits of belief and endurance. Some accused, despite all measures, exhibited a resilience that defied the cult's expectations. In rare cases, these individuals withstood days of isolation, sensory deprivation, and ritualized torment, refusing to yield their identity or confession. The guardians of the sacred fire, those who had committed their lives to preserving purity, were sometimes left unsettled, questioning the severity of the punishments they administered. It was as if the accused had tapped into a hidden reservoir of strength, a refusal to submit that transcended the cult's rigid doctrines. One particularly harrowing account tells of an acolyte who, accused of defiling a sacred text, was placed in a chamber where heat, light, and shadow were manipulated in unison. For 3 days, the flames flickered unpredictably, casting disorienting patterns across the stone walls. Every time the acolyte moved, the shadows seemed to shift, as though the room itself were alive, watching, judging. Water was withheld, air thick with the scent of incense and smoke, creating a sensory environment designed to break even the strongest spirit. And yet, The accused remained focused, repeating prayers under their breath, refusing to betray fear. Even the senior priests, observing from hidden vantage points, exchanged uneasy glances. Their own training, their faith, their authority, felt suddenly fragile against the will of one individual. In another case, a group of initiates accused of clandestine heretical practices were subjected to a combination of physical restraint and symbolic rituals intended to purge them completely. They were bound in positions that prevented rest, instructed to recite sacred incantations while enduring extreme temperatures, and compelled to witness the ceremonial cleansing of objects they had allegedly corrupted. For hours, sometimes days, the line between ritual instruction and torment blurred, until the accused appeared to dissolve into the very process. Their sense of self eroded, while their bodies remained intact. Yet, remarkably, some retained subtle gestures, brief glances, or whispered words that hinted at consciousness, resilience, and defiance. The priests noted these signs in secret ledgers, sometimes with awe, sometimes with fear. What made these extreme cases particularly alarming was the moral dissonance they caused. The guardians, trained to enforce purity at any cost, occasionally confronted the realization that their actions, though justified by doctrine, bordered on cruelty even by their own standards. They saw that the accused could endure, that the human spirit was capable of withstanding far more than ritual codes had accounted for. And in those moments, doubt entered the chambers, a.d.e. dangerous and unspoken presence. Could they truly claim divine sanction for what they were witnessing? Were they instruments of purification or of suffering beyond necessity? These stories survived in fragmented texts and clandestine records, hinting at practices so extreme that even those fully initiated sometimes recoiled. The rituals were designed to test, transform, and sometimes terrify beyond comprehension. And as you imagine these scenes, think of the tension in those chambers, the quiet disbelief of the priests watching as their expectations were defied, the subtle defiance of the accused whose survival challenged the very system itself. Now, I want to ask you, what do you think it would feel like to witness such events? To see endurance and fear collide in these secret chambers? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts, your shock, or even your disbelief. The darkness we are uncovering is more than history. It is a reminder of the human capacity for both cruelty and resilience, and the stories that remain hidden demand to be acknowledged. For those who survived the most severe rituals, the consequences extended far beyond the immediate trials. The accused, even when released or reintegrated into the wider community, carried the imprint of the cult's authority in ways both visible and invisible. Physical marks, subtle behavioral patterns, and the memory of sensory manipulation became constant reminders of the ordeal. Yet the more profound effects were psychological and spiritual. Survivors often found themselves hyper-aware of every movement, every thought, and every interaction, forever attuned to the unseen eyes that might still be watching, judging, or recording. Their very perception of reality had been reshaped by the deliberate orchestration of fear and obedience. The cults understood this, and the reintegration process was carefully structured to reinforce dependence and submission. Survivors were sometimes allowed to participate in minor ceremonial functions under strict supervision, ensuring they learned obedience through both observation and performance. They were taught to interpret the sacred texts according to the cult's hidden codes, to understand that any deviation could reignite suspicion. The line between genuine devotion and learned compliance blurred, making it difficult for them to discern their own intentions from the expectations imposed by the priests. Every decision became a test, every action a rehearsal for potential judgment. In addition to behavioral oversight, survivors were often socially isolated in subtle ways. Relationships with family or peers were monitored, and interactions were sometimes restricted to fellow initiates or trusted members of the cult. This network of observation, while less visible than the intense chambers of punishment, functioned as an enduring mechanism of control. Even those who had endured extreme physical or psychological trial could not escape the subtler structures of oversight that ensured conformity. Their identities, once private and autonomous, were now intertwined with the authority of a hidden hierarchy that remained largely unseen by the outside world. Spiritual consequences were equally profound. Survivors often described a heightened sensitivity to ritual, a nearly instinctive awareness of spiritual purity or contamination, and an unshakable sense of accountability to forces beyond human comprehension. These experiences created a dual consciousness, one part shaped by personal belief, the other conditioned by years of observation, scrutiny, and ritualized suffering. In some accounts, individuals reported dreams or visions in which the sacred flame itself appeared to interrogate them, replaying scenarios from their trials, or testing responses to imagined infractions. Even in freedom, the shadow of the cult persisted, a constant echo of the invisible chamber in which they had been remade. Documentary evidence. Fragments of secret scrolls and clandestine memoirs suggest that these survivors often became the instruments of the cult themselves. They carried forward knowledge of the rituals, the punishments, and the methods of observation, ensuring the continuity of the system. In this way, the cult maintained both secrecy and continuity, using those who had endured as living proof of the power of its methods. Each survivor became simultaneously a witness and a participant, a reminder of obedience enforced and compliance achieved, sustaining the hidden structures of influence across generations and geographic boundaries. And yet, even among survivors, there lingered a quiet tension between fear and agency. While they had adapted, internalized rules, and learned to navigate the unseen authority, the memory of what they had endured remained a persistent presence. Every ritual performed, every sacred object handled, carried with it the weight of past suffering, a testament to both the cruelty and the meticulous sophistication of a cult that operated in the shadows of history, shaping souls long after the flames of immediate punishment had cooled. The historical footprint of these secretive practices is subtle, hidden in manuscripts, inscriptions, and fragmented records that survived centuries of neglect, censorship, and deliberate erasure. Unlike public ceremonies, which were documented and celebrated, the clandestine rituals of the Zoroastrian cults were often deliberately obscured, their details recorded in codes, shorthand, or oral transmission. Scholars piecing together these fragments encounter a world that is difficult to reconstruct fully. Every surviving note, every cryptic reference, offers only a glimpse into the sophisticated machinery of fear, discipline, and spiritual control that shaped lives with near-invisible hands. One of the most revealing sources comes from letters and diaries smuggled from temple precincts, accounts written by those who fled or observed from the margins. They describe processes that are methodical, almost clinical, in their precision. Each step of accusation, each stage of scrutiny, and each ritualized punishment was codified, suggesting a system refined over generations. The documents show that even among initiates and acolytes, obedience was monitored, deviations noted, and outcomes carefully catalogued. These were not random acts of cruelty. They were deliberate, systematic, and intended to preserve a version of spiritual authority that could survive beyond the lives of any individual priest. Archaeological evidence, though limited, corroborates some of these accounts. In certain temple complexes, hidden chambers, and subterranean passageways, scholars have found traces of ritual implements, worn inscriptions, and symbols that suggest the presence of practices unknown to the general population. Marks on stone, patterns burned into ceremonial objects, and remnants of long-extinguished flames indicate that these spaces were used for concentrated private rites. The layout of these chambers often mirrors the complexity described in surviving texts. Rooms for isolation, observation points, and controlled spaces for sensory deprivation, all designed to exert psychological and spiritual influence over the accused. Beyond the physical traces, inscriptions and coded texts reveal the ideological foundation of the cult's hidden power. They emphasize an unbroken chain of authority and responsibility, connecting the smallest acts of ritual compliance with cosmic balance. Deviance was treated as an existential threat, not only to the individual, but to the sacred order itself. Priests justified extreme measures, asserting that failure to correct even minor spiritual transgressions could invite chaos, corruption, or the wrath of divine forces. Through these records, a chilling picture emerges. The cult's authority extended far beyond immediate rituals, shaping communities, behaviors, and beliefs in subtle but pervasive ways. Even today, historians struggle to understand the full extent of these practices. Many details were deliberately hidden, lost to secrecy and the passage of time, leaving only tantalizing fragments that hint at a world both terrifying and meticulously structured. The surviving documents suggest that the hidden power of these cults was not merely theoretical, it was operational, enforceable, and extraordinarily effective in maintaining control over those who entered their sphere. The psychological and social consequences were profound, shaping generations, influencing conduct, and leaving traces that scholars can still detect, decades or centuries later. This concealed history reminds us that human systems of control do not always rely on force alone. Sometimes, the mastery of fear, secrecy, and belief can impose compliance far more powerfully than any visible threat. And as you reflect on these revelations, consider how much of what history records is surface, truth, and how much lies buried beneath layers of silence, awaiting rediscovery. As the centuries passed, the hidden mechanisms of the Zoroastrian cults gradually faded from public awareness, leaving only fragments of memory, texts, and scattered artifacts. Yet the legacy of these secret rituals endured, embedded in the very structure of spiritual authority they had crafted. Those who survived were changed forever, their lives shaped by the lessons of fear, obedience, and endurance. They became both witnesses and carriers of knowledge, ensuring that the influence of the cult, though hidden, persisted across generations. Even as empires rose and fell, the echoes of these practices whispered in the margins of history, reminding anyone who dared investigate that what is unseen can be more powerful than what is visible. The meticulous records, coded manuscripts, and oral accounts paint a picture of a system that was not only sophisticated but terrifyingly effective. Every accusation, every ritual, every punishment was part of a larger network designed to enforce control over both mind and soul. The cults understood human psychology with an uncanny precision, exploiting fear, expectation, and obedience to maintain authority. And for those who survived the scrutiny of these secret chambers, the lessons learned were as enduring as they were severe. Every thought, gesture, and prayer could be measured, judged, and corrected. and deviation carried consequences beyond imagination. Yet in the midst of these stories of control and suffering, there are lessons that resonate beyond history. The courage, resilience, and subtle defiance of the accused reveal that even in the darkest corners of authority, the human spirit can endure. The survivors, though shaped by fear, managed to retain fragments of autonomy and moral understanding, showing that compliance and resistance exist simultaneously in ways that are never simple or absolute. History remembers the cults for their methods, but it also remembers those who endured them, whose lives became living testimonies to the tension between power and perseverance. Now that we have explored the hidden chambers, the rituals, and the extreme measures taken against those accused of heresy, I want to leave you with this thought. Understanding these practices is not merely about fascination with the past, but about recognizing how authority, secrecy, and fear can shape behavior in any era. If this story has left you shocked, intrigued, or questioning what you thought you knew about faith and control, make sure to leave a comment. Let me know if this revelation moved you, surprised you, or challenged your perspective. Every comment helps keep the conversation alive, and your insight matters. If you found value in uncovering this hidden history, give the video a like and check whether you are subscribed to the channel so you don't miss the next journey into the shadows of ancient practices. And before you go, there is another video that delves even deeper into the secret worlds of ancient cults, where rituals and authority intersect in ways that continue to fascinate and terrify. Click over and continue exploring with me, because the stories of the past have lessons we cannot afford to ignore, and the darkness we uncover today prepares us to see history with sharper, more discerning eyes.